Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovations.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Jayson Coil to the show. Thank you for joining me today, Jayson.
Hi, Mike, and thank you for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
I followed you for a long time. We sort of connected for a long time, and it's great to just finally get you on the show to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited about it. I tell you what, the diagrams and stuff that you put up on LinkedIn, you said a lot of things that are hard to say in words in some of those diagrams. So I appreciate that. Makes sense of
cheers,
things.
mate. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I always like it that my stuff can be useful. Just for our listeners, do you mind giving a bit of background, a bit of context about yourself?
Sure. So I am a firefighter by trade, I guess you could say. Once I got out of the military, I went to school to become a paramedic and then a firefighter. And then after I was a firefighter a while, I was like, well, I got to go back to school to be able to be a captain. And then I had to go back to school again. So ended up right now, I am the operations chief for the Sedona Fire District, and also an operations chief on a complex incident management team. Used to be called Type 1 incident management teams in the U.S. And, my emphasis is really my focus has been around the strategy development and enabling that strategy in the field. So I have been deployed, I figured out the other day, for almost 3 years on incidents in the 25 years that I've been in the fire, 27 years I've been in the fire service. So quite a bit of time out there trying to see if the things I thought up in my head actually work in practice.
That's always a good test, isn't it?
Yeah, sure is.
We could all sit here and have great ideas, but it's actually how do they meet reality? How do they translate to the people that are actually operating on the ground? And I find that's where a lot of leaders get that disconnect. So completely disconnected.
And I've been guilty of that before, of presenting something so confusingly well that there was no questions, and I took that as meaning that I had done it well. And I'm going to find out later on, when there wasn't alignment, that I hadn't done it very well at all. So,
yeah, we always talk about the power is in the interpretation. And unfortunately, we never know how it's interpreted unless we ask.
Yeah, if you could get comfortable doing a readback when you don't know, or even when you think you know, and with people, man, it's just kind of a superpower, really, and it's awkward at first, and because you don't want to be that person in the room that doesn't know. But it's amazing how many times I can reflect back on when you do that, and then you come out of the room and everybody's like, "Hey, I'm glad you asked that because I really wasn't clear either. Or, I'm glad you said that because I thought what you thought and that wasn't right." And I'm like, so yeah, that's a good tool. That's a good tool.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I often say to people, like, what you really need to do, it doesn't really matter if you as a leader understand the plan, because you're probably not the one who's enacting the plan. What's really important, that the people that are enacting it understand, and the only way you can cross that barrier is asking them. Or, in the military, everything that we're taught is all about, we don't give the information, we ask questions. I.e., what happens when this happens? And they tell you. That's so powerful because you actually then understand if they've interpreted it the way it should have been interpreted.
Yeah, that when it comes to planning, and I would suspect it's the same in business. The contingencies that, at least in my world, are underrepresented in the planning, exactly like that. Because you'll ask someone, they'll present their preferred course of action, if you were, and no other alternatives. And then you say, so if your plan failed, where would it fail? And what have you done to minimize the impact of that? Right then, it's a great gauge, right? Because if somebody says, my plan, it will never fail, that's a washout.
Yeah.
And then if there's no planning for it, but it gives you an opportunity to see. And sometimes you're surprised. Sometimes they're 2 and 3 deep in their contingencies and they've really been thoughtful about it. And that's exciting, and you feel a lot more confident about it.
And you want them to have confidence. When someone says, "Oh yeah, my plan's great," I want you to have confidence in your plan, but I want to make sure that you've got a reason to be confident in your plan. I think there's a very big difference.
Yeah, and even the question I said, right? You ask that the wrong way, and they're not going to want to say anything in front of you again if they feel like you're trying to set them up or whatever. But there's there's need to have some rapport there before you ask that question in such a direct way. But getting to it one way or another is important.
Yeah, but that's that. I suppose what people talk about, that Candour, isn't it? But you can't have that. It's the same with mission command. You can't have any of that without trust. Once you've got that trust, you can have that Candour, and I can come out and go, all right, well, we can say those questions you just said earlier about, what contingencies you've got planned, where would your plan fail? When you've got that trust, they'll open up and go, well, actually, probably if it's going to fail, it's going to fail here. Rather than you don't build that, they're not going to tell you nothing. They'll be like, I don't know.
No, in fact, this was last year on a fire. We had a bunch of new division supervisors, so the people that are responsible for a section of the fire. And I was asking them questions because they presented this plan that was something we didn't do. I'd never done it before, and they said, how likely do you think this is going to work? And they said 70%, 75% that it's going to be successful. I said, well, how many times have you done this before? Oh, this is the first time. So I said, so help me understand how you arrived at 75%. If this is the first time you've ever done it. And some of them were like, God, Coil's hard on us. I was like, well, I'm not. We do it in a private group. We make sure that because we want you to tell the truth. And it's okay that you gave me that number. Sometimes people ask for those numbers, but I'm more interested in what you're thinking. And that's the value there.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of people forget about the tools like after action reviews, backbriefs, red teaming. It's not about like the plan or anything. It's the thinking. It's all about exploring the thinking. Like that's what we want to know because that's what we can help and support with. But we must understand the thinking.
You must. And I'm like most of the stuff I talk about is just because I did it wrong for a long time. And that's certainly this one. I would plan in a vacuum, and I would think that if I put enough effort into it, I could make the best possible plan, and that means that the plan would be successful in a complex environment, which is silly, right? Now I think about a 90% plan to that first place that you may need to iterate. So what does that look like? How do you keep everybody safe? How do you have a 90? And then that goes back to that mission command part, right? Is so when you need to deviate or iterate, what are the constraints? What are the things that we can do to help you if that happens? What do you need to communicate? All that sort of stuff. And yeah, seeing that plan all the way through the end looks good when you start to finish, like you really know what's going on. I don't know. My experience doesn't work well.
No, I've done long planning, in the military and also in civilian world, helping companies, look at from strategy to execution and doing those planning phases. And when you're in that, that plan, because we've gone through quite a rigorous process to get to that, it looks great. It's not until you invite people to destroy that plan and you sit there and people are going, well, have you thought about this? Or what happens if this happens? Then you just start seeing your plan crumble. It's not a bad thing. It's not that your plan's rubbish. It's just that when you're in that planning phase and you're coming up with these answers, those answers become the best answers that you think you've got, and you get locked in. So it's good when someone else is going, have you thought about this? No, I haven't.
Yeah, and I I'm sure I stole this from someone, but I don't remember who. But telling people that, hey, don't become pregnant with the plan. The plan's not your baby. It might be ugly, and that's okay. We'll still, I'm sure we'll find something that it's good at. So let's just, not become so heavily invested in that plan that it becomes the prize. That keeping your plan as the plan that's presented, even if it fails in execution, becomes that's how you measure success. And I'm like, oh, that's a risky measure. And
yeah. And I've had it before where, in operations where we thought we had a great plan. It's not until we had it tested do we realise there were big gaping holes. But thank God for that, because it was those gaping holes that were the actual problem when we executed it. So hadn't we tested it, hadn't we thought about and reiterated it and come up with solutions, we would have been left wanting in those operations. And that's not the place that you want to be testing this. You want to test it beforehand as best you can.
Yeah, and something that brings to mind is that is when values are there's values that are in tension, that between, especially in multi-agency kind of responses, and you haven't explicitly, called those out and said them, because it's like if you don't want to go to a party, and so you say, "Well, oh, sorry, I got to get the wood in, or I got to go do this," and she's, "Oh, yeah, I got the wood in for you," and you go through like 5 different things that, instead of saying, "I just really don't want to go to that party,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's to me what it's like when those values aren't stated, because you're trying to solve things, but you're never solving for the right thing because people haven't, they haven't been explicit about it, and
Yeah.
it's hard. Yeah.
It's good, and I think it's really important because in your current organization, plus your background and my background, that the decision, the feedback loop between a decision and impact with reality is very short, and it's extremely sharp if we haven't got it, haven't thought it through. Where I find that a lot of times in organizations, especially larger organizations, they could make a decision and they won't see the impact of that for like 3 years, which then means when you're saying to them, right, have we thought about this? Have we done some red team and war gamed it? Have we thought about the consequences of this? What would happen if this happened? I find they're not interested because they're like, well, it's not going to impact me.
So I wrote a paper. I can give it to you, put it in the chat if you want, or in the links, but
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
about the failure of our incident management system in the U.S., and that all of the different agencies, at the end of it, I did a pre-mortem, and basically my headline was that after this fire season, when everything failed miserably, everything was combined underneath one fire service. And then I invited people to provide different pathways for that, and did kind of a crowdsourced pre-mortem, if you will, from different people in the fire service. And I put it all together, and I was wrong about the outcome because it happened a year earlier than I said it would. It was like 3 years out instead of 4 years out. But we just do, on February 8th, the United States is going to go to a U.S. Wildland Fire Service for all of the Department of Interior folks. But it's not that I was right. It's that I was most right because I got all these people together to look at a long-term plan, and different people were able to put in those horizons in different ways. Because you're right. It's so easy to just go to the near term, to where the quarterly profits are measured, or where the end of this incident is, or the things that you can control easily, and you don't have to recruit allies or get people to compel them to align with you downstream. And that's hard. That part's hard. Yeah.
It is hard.
And and I was thinking back to what you said about mission command, and I thought it was funny because I was wrote some notes for our conversation. I put build the team and climate. That was my thing one.
Mm.
And I was like, man,
Yeah.
if I was doing this, that'd be like the first, if it was a 20-page document, that should be the first 15. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Instead of just a one statement.
How would you, how would you look at building that?
I think back to your point about trust is like, what are those concrete behaviors that I can do that create mutual trust? What are those things that I can do all the time that I don't have to read the room about, that align with who I am as a person, and that I can do that? And then how can we create safe to fail simulations, and ones where you're safe to fail too? Telling people to trust you is one thing, but exposing your soft underbelly and showing them the throat like dogs do to each other, that's a different kind of trust, right? That shows that you really trust somebody. So show some vulnerability in that part. And then the last thing I was thinking about was, what's the difference between real safety and just saying it's safe? Because when people throw around words, hey, don't worry, this is a psychologically safe environment. We really want to hear what you have to think. It's like, look beyond those layers, right? Because how policies are written, how day-to-day practices, how you discipline people, how you treat failures, if it's on a continuum, or if it's always like a failure equals a consequence kind of thing. I think all those are the things, some of the things you got to look at to start to build that group. And they're the tricky ones.
And I think that's when people look at climate or culture, they think about it as just like words, as in like, yeah, we trust you, we empower you, want a psychological. They don't equate that to all the other things like, our policies. What do our actual policies say and incentivize? When we last disciplined people for doing something, what was that for? And it's normally, like, say for instance, you say you want people to take initiative, but the last time someone took initiative, they got shouted down. No one's going to take initiative after that.
Yeah, that's a great one. That is a great one. And I think until you get there, because the next note I wrote was on, I said, communicate for shared understanding and intent. And until someone's willing to tell you that, hey, I don't understand what you're telling me, which
Yeah.
takes that trust, which takes right, then you're never gonna get there. I think it's something that I'm sure I overlook in a lot of ways, or
Yeah.
I or underrepresented
Yeah,
in that.
it's quite easy to though. It's like we've been there, and it's like it's hard because when you've got everything going on and you've got these people around you, you communicate, and there's that thing. Unless we're consciously thinking about it, we forget that just because I've communicated in a way that makes sense to me, it doesn't mean it makes sense to them. And it's not because they're stupid. It's just because we are unique and individual, and we perceive things and see things completely different. And actually, just slowing down and saying, "This is what I want," like, repeat back to me, or go tell me what you're thinking right now. You know,
Yeah. No, I
yeah,
I I I like what you said there, Mike, because, one of the things I do when I present the strategy, because right, my title says strategic operations. I'm the one that develops a strategy for these incidents. When I present it, it's easy for people to be, "Oh, you know, some not quite be clear." And they're like, "Well, Coyle does this all the time, so he probably knows what he's talking about." And then that, that ambiguity gets amplified as it goes out in the field and everything else. And so, tell people like, "Man, I've worked on this and I feel like it can be better. I just haven't been able to figure out the areas where I really need to improve it. Can you point out at least one that needs to be improved?" And that's a different framing, right? For somebody than, "Hey, review my plan. Let me know if it's okay." Uh, and so I've had success with that, is getting better information and then,
and
trying to iterate off
yeah,
that and improve the plan.
and you're inviting it, and I think that's something like, I've had it. I've done it me personally myself. I've been tired, I've been stressed, and I've got a plan, and then someone says something, and legitimately they've spotted something, and I'm just like, I'm not in the mood for this right now. But it's a bad thing because then it comes across that you can't, if you can't challenge, and that's what we want. Bob Molter was talking about that. He wanted that. Was he call it obedient discipline or initiative? Initiative, yeah. Where he said we're going to use our initiative. We're going to be obedient, but you can challenge.
Yeah, disciplined initiative. Yeah, is what I think Mission Command kind of morphed it into. And you're right. That's another thing it's not explicit. Basically, the fire service, when you start out, at least, I imagine this way in a lot of ways, and it sets us up for failure downstream. You guys, you're directing them on what to do, and there's a lot of good reasons why you're directing them on what to do. You direct them on the policies they need to learn, and you direct them all this kind of stuff. And it's how you do that, and how much you make sure they understand the why. I think at that phase, that matters for later on, because if the why is that if you're going to deviate, then you need to know the common practice frontwards and backwards. So if you say you're going to do, common practice X, that everybody knows exactly what that looks like and they have confidence that you're executing it the way you're supposed to. That's part of it. And so then you know when to deviate. And then the other part of it is just that then when you say there's a deviation, they don't question that the common practice wouldn't work. They know that you deviated for a reason. But would you just enforce the common practice and don't give people that other side of it from the beginning, and then you try to switch gears later on as they get more experience? I don't know. You've already kind of conditioned them one way, and I think it gets harder. I think it gets harder to teach people that.
Yeah, it's got to be something that you've been introduced with, and I think what a lot of people do when they try and build this into the organization is they don't build that, like you said earlier, that sort of the right team and the climate. They don't build that trust, and then they try to put this in, as in like it's just a sort of a fad, and then just because it doesn't work straight away, they just abandon it and they go back to the controlling ways. Where this takes a lot. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes trust, it takes a lot of failure, but they'll learn through those failures.
I could agree with you more. I was tasked with redoing our performance management system, because we had one that's just like everybody else, like a lot of people's, probably not everybody's, but where it's a once a year sit down. If you're the subordinate, you fill out your little sheet ahead of time about the things that you think you do well. You go down, sit with your boss. Your boss tells you how you grade it out and gives you things to help you improve. And there's like, there's so much baked into that process, the infrequency of it to actually end up change the, the facade that it creates. And so as I was going to change that, man, I wanted to align more with mission command. And then I was like, I realized all the different things that people had to know. I realized all the things that we had to teach them. All the ways that our policies needed to align with that language and behaviors, and make sure that our disciplinary process will align with that as well. That, that some errors are applaudable and some errors are, there's a very real and very immediate consequence for them. But explaining that continuum, and it's hard. It took a lot more time than I thought. I wasn't just fixing a performance management system, if we want to go that way, but it's so powerful. I mean, being able to go out there and do it and know that they're doing it well in a coordinated way when the environment's going to change from what they saw when they got there is worth the effort.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. People go in thinking there's just a lever that they're going to go for, like performance management, and that's going to solve their problems. They realize, no, there's a whole structure around here we can say we want you to have discipline, initiative, and do this stuff. But if everything else is saying something different, they're not going to do it. They'll go with what's enforced by the structure.
Right. So when we were during COVID, the very beginning of COVID, as we were learning more things, the posture and our PPE requirements, our mask requirements specifically changed. And I remember I had a meeting with all the captains, and I said, hey, so this is the standard. And I spelled out what first contact was supposed to look like as far as what they're supposed to wear. I said, unless that level of protection will prevent you from accomplishing the mission, then you have the ability to deviate. I said, then I would expect you to. And they're like, well, then what do you want us to do? And then, so what are we supposed to deviate to? I said, well, it depends. If you're on the end of a rope doing a high angle rescue and you can't wear a mask as a comp, then you probably take that off. That's up to you guys on how you deviate, but you should. And then I realized that I think as firefighters, we're good within our domain, but then this was something that was outside of our domain, and it went from being uncertain to being ambiguous, and it took more work to get everybody aligned. We eventually got there, but it was my fault because I was framing it as just an uncertain environment, but there was so much ambiguity around it that it was different. And I didn't recognize the difference.
It's like, I remember a while ago, the British Army went through this thing. I think I had left by this point, thankfully, but they had this whole sleeves down, sleeves up thing. And what it was is they were going on about, because it was in the British Army, as soon as it comes to a certain date near summer, that's when sleeves get rolled up and we have short sleeve order. In the winter, it comes back to long sleeve order. But then because of our weather is a bit strange, sometimes you may have a bit of hot weather, you may have a bit of cold weather. People are like, oh, it's stupid that I have to, really bone thing. Like, it's stupid that I have to have the sleeves rolled up. I'm cold, I can have them down. And then so they brought this new thing out going, if you're cold, you can have your sleeves down. I'm like, what are we doing? I said, the problem isn't that people can't have their sleeves up and down. The problem is that we don't have any mission commands on camp. The fact that, a local commander can't make the decision to deviate from a dress policy because actually, lads, it's cold. Pull your sleeves down if you want. That's the problem. But they were looking at something completely strange like sleeves. The problem is, the underlying root is, there's no mission command. Local commanders do not think they can have the discipline initiative to deviate from a policy.
Yeah, if the leader knew what I knew, would he do what I did?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If the leader knew these guys were cold, what would he do? Expect them to stay cold and put their sleeves down. That should be enough, right? Without having to go any further into it. But it's fascinating. Good. That's good. I like that because it is representative, and I think finding those things that almost seem silly, but that are, basically evaluation of your mission command culture are important because it prevents you from waiting to find that out when it really matters. If you can take those little things serious and then and then reinforce the right behavior there, or call yourself out if you're the one in charge for not enabling that. And then that'd be a powerful lesson.
Yeah. I think so. I think they missed that opportunity because they just put it as a social media or communications campaign about sleeves up and sleeves down without really thinking, actually, let's look at, first principles here. And actually, we've got something fundamentally wrong here with what we're meant to be established around, which is, mission command. It's meant to be sacrosanct to us. But you see this all the time. And no doubt you must see this because you are in a safety critical environment and you have standards, policies that are are written from high.
Oh yeah. And I think the most, at least indelible example of that was when I was a brand new division supervisor. I was the guy that was in charge of that section of fire. It was in 2002 on this fire called the Nettle Fire. The night before we put line in, fire got across that line. I thought the line was going to hold. And now we stood to lose this whole flank of this fire and threaten these big telescopes, all this stuff. And so we were trying to hold this line, and fire got established down below us, and a bunch of us got cut off at this helispot, this area they cleared for hell base, or to fly people off this really steep ridge full of fuel. And as conditions worsened, the fire got all the way around us. And basically we were in the chimney, which is not a particularly good place to be when the fire is below you. And so there's a bunch of hot embers landing everywhere. It's hard to breathe. Smoke was everywhere. And I was reticent to tell people to open up their shelters, these aluminum kind of tents that we have to protect ourselves from the radiant heat and the smoke, because I knew that it was going to prompt an investigation. Because the moment you bust those open, it prompts an investigation is the next thing to follow. But looking back at that, that's certainly one of the strongest points of where I was focused on consequence and instead of just focusing on what was the right thing to do in that moment. And the right thing there would have been and we did eventually, a slow learner, but luckily I eventually learned. And yeah.
But I see that, and I think that I've seen it a lot in certain organizations I work with that are safety critical, is that they're training people, and I think it's dangerous. They're training people, or not training them directly as official training, but through behavior and policies and processes. They're training people not to consider context, to only consider policy. And you can't operate that way because, context is key. You must understand the context. You must understand the aim, like you said earlier, clear and ambiguous intent, and context. That's the thing that gives them the awareness to when do I need to flex, when you deviate, because I know that I need to achieve this aim. I know I need to do this safely. So how can I achieve the aim as safe as possible? Rather than thinking, if I do this, then, I'm going to get a consequence of an investigation or something.
Well, I mean, had the question I'd asked myself been, what's in the best interest of the firefighters that are here with me right now? It would have been to get them in the shelters, to get them out of the smoke. That would have been the right question to ask. You get conditioned through, it's not, there's reasons for it, right? And I could think of the exact serious acts investigation that just hammered these guys for doing what they needed to do in a particular situation that was forefront in my mind when I was worried about what it was going to look like for me, the reputational damage, all that kind of stuff. But that was the wrong lens. Yeah. It's right one would have been the safety lens. Because in the day, that's what we're charged with, right?
Yeah. And I mean, this is why really good after action reviews are really important, and not just for when things go wrong, just like generally, because you start to learn, and I think what I love about that is those assumptions. Like if you were there, and we're going like, what prevented you from getting your shuttles out sooner? And you go, because I thought, consequent. That kind of insight is golden. That you're thinking, wow, what's causing us to create an environment or climate that's the response that I'm getting from my people.
Yeah, no, you're right. And we actually did they did a staff ride for it. And it was one of the ones because usually we do them, I think a lot like the military, over incidents that had fatalities associated with them or something like that. But this is one that didn't, and we did a staff ride about it. But when we met to do the staff ride and we're going through that, I thought I had a very congruent narrative of what happened and what was going on at this other place we called the Aspen Stand, where people got cut off and were stuck at. And man, my story was 60% accurate at best. Once you start hearing from the people that were there, sitting around talking about everybody's different perspective. And I think that's just a good thing to remember, and not just in bad days, right? But just that you're looking at this through the amount of sleep you got the night before, the other stressors you got going on, the way the last fire behaved, and so is everybody else, especially communities you go into. I actually will tell people, remember, we're fighting this fire and we're fighting the fire that happened before it. Because whatever didn't go right on that one is changing the frame of how people are looking at it when they're the people that live there. They didn't go through 10 more fires like we did since then. That was their last one. And certain things are going to matter more to them because of what didn't go well before.
Yeah.
That's,
That's so good. It's so true as well. I think we sort of neglect actually the importance of the last fire or the last fight or the last incident we've been in, because that's the thing closest to the mind that's going to shape their decisions. Yeah, that's really good. I like that.
Yeah. Whether it's rapid response, it's how your mobility, counter mobility setups, whatever you didn't do well, you're probably going to overemphasize or have a tendency to. And then how do you do it better, but still just give it just the attention it deserves when you got all those other things competing for your attention? I don't know. That's the secret, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I always like, because your environment, I look at it and think, I take my hats off, you're in a really safety critical, dealing with those wildfires. And often when I'm speaking to organizations that are in those safety critical, highly regulated, and we talk about stuff like mission command, learning, and all that stuff, it's almost as if like, you can't do that here. The policy says this, and that's it. We must do. How do you wrestle that? How do you get the learning, the mission command into an organization like that?
Well, I would say the first thing is that we are not immune to those. Maybe next time we talk, I'll give you more about it. But I'm part of a process right now, and that there's a lot of supposed to be an interagency process, and it's going to be a big deal. But there are people that want to protect their agency position, and so that's thing one that happens, right? Is that whether it's your agency, whether it's your the section you represent, whether it's your incident management team, if there's something there that's taking a higher priority over the goal, over the stated intent of the mission, then that's something that we certainly have to watch out for. But we talk about that, that we have the ability, we have a discretionary function. So we have discretion, but lots of times that doesn't get tested until afterwards. And it's tested in sometimes a very legalistic way, whether, but culturally it's acceptable to make those deviations, but it's also because 99% of the time it goes right. I think if you took your choice, if you took your evaluator set and looked back to so the short version is we need to have more fires on the landscape if we're going to prevent large catastrophic fires. And that means that there's going to be decisions made to let fires burn that sometimes will not go as planned. And so how do you look at the decision quality, all the different steps to make a high quality decision, source of information, reducing bias, all that kind of stuff, separate from the outcome in a way that allows people to improve and not excuse their behavior because it's something beyond their control, but at the same time makes it where when a bad consequence occurs, you can improve from it and not just stop doing that. Because it's easy to just say, put them all out. I mean, we did that in the United States for 100 years, and it didn't work very well for us.
Yeah.
Created a bunch of unhealthy environments, but that was probably not a very good answer. But in my mind, that's it. Is you have to. I mean, I think to sum it up, you need to separate the divorce decision outcome from decision quality when you're evaluating how you can improve.
Yeah, and I think that's quite. And I always say to people about, we call them after action reviews, not after outcome reviews, because we can't change the outcome. So why the outcome's the outcome? We can improve the decision making. We can change that over time, but we can't. The outcome's happened, and I think that's perfect. How to separate the two, and I think that's what people really struggle with. They can't separate, so they never learn. Because I think about a certain organisation I work with that's safety critical, and something you said earlier around was it you said the thing that most of the time it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think about the amount of times that these engineers, they do stuff and they do deviate and it works and it's fine, but they don't say anything. So they don't get that feedback about, oh yeah, they deviated and this happened and they're learning from it. They don't say, because there's that one time where something did go wrong and all hell breaks loose. And the only response is to put another policy, stop them from doing that, or put another policy, another process in place, which then they think, can't go through that again.
Yeah. And I think about, as I was going through that policy part of what I told you before, there are so many of them that I could have put names on. Oh, that's so and so because he found this loophole in not calling in sick on time or whatever. Everything gets tightened up, and I'm like, I don't know. It takes a while to unwind those, and I get it, and especially when it comes to like when you're going interior on a fire, there is a process that is the standard way that. So all the other groups of firefighters that show up, they have an expectation, unless they hear different, that this is what you're doing, this is where you're going.
Yeah.
So, all that is important. And then when you deviate, you got to say why, so it doesn't become those deviations that are hidden. And then, but the flip side of that is, at least what I see, is that we deviate when the tempo gives us slack, that we can afford to make processes less effective and to make communication less concise and less complete. And then when you get back into an up tempo, because sometimes I'll be on a firefighter and there'll be a fire and there'll be 200 or 300 people that work for me. Sometimes the most I think is 5,000. So it changes quite a bit there, and how quickly a fire is advancing, and how aged your intelligence is by the time you start taking action on it, all that kind of stuff. And so all those processes, those workarounds that you did because you didn't have a clear process, they work fine up to a threshold, but then it is like it's not just a gradual fail. The wheels come off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we're on a fire in Washington, and one of those examples, we flew through different crews up on these high ridges in Blackhawks, and they were all supposed to work on different sections of the line and come together. Well, that night it finally snowed, it was on the Rockies on the Continental Divide. It snowed a lot, and so there's these 3 groups of firefighters stuck up there in the cold, and then they use sling loads to bring them food, hot meals in that night. Well, they screwed up the sling loads. One crew got all the steaks, one got all the mashed potatoes, and the other one got all the lettuce. It was right before dark. There was no flying up there to change it. Like, if you're the steak guy, and even if you're the mashed potato guy, you're probably not that big of a deal to you. Same mistake, same error. But if you're the lettuce guy and you're going to be up there all night freezing, you're going to look at it different. You're going to care more. Yeah.
You're not going to be happy with that, being the lettuce guy. I remember in Iraq in 2003 when we went over the border, they had messed up the logistics, and we had the same meal for like months. So we had the same beef and stew for months. Like, it got that bad. We were trying to rob from the US Marines to steal some of their food.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle stew anymore.
That's bad when you'd rather have a dehydrated pork patty or a hot dog like they were back in the day. And then
Yeah. But you're right about that, about the different mistakes. And again, it's like what people can look at this and what we're not advocating for is people shooting from the hip. And I think that's what gets confused around this learning and mission command, is that it's like you could do what you want, but it's not. There is a key thing around, constraints. There must be constraints. There must be a clear intent about what the aim is, stated aim. And they must have the capability to have that freedom. So they must have training, high level of understanding of doctrine, the training, and that gives them the freedom of action to do what they need to do.
I frankly think I espouse this in that training stuff that I was developing, but you have to have a higher degree of competence in the standard approach, if you will, whether it's what we call minimum company standards for how you would, tie the hose to the hydrant and bring it into a house, or however. You have to know all those things to a greater degree than you would if you weren't exercising mission command. because when you deviate and you communicate that over the radio, it needs to know why. They need to understand that there's a reason, and they need to understand, because at the end of the day, I mean, you said it before, appreciate the context, define the problem, develop an approach. So if you're not doing it the standard way, then that means that that context that we expect in 90% of the single family home fires is different for some reason here. And that should be the thing that gets everybody paying attention, because it's I like it. You could list on every fire, like every large fire been on, like a bunch of things that are the same. And that's not very useful. But if you say, what's different about this fire? You know, hey, that smoke looks more purple than black that's coming out of the top of that house. Why is that? And then you know what I mean? There's just things, and so weak signals, right? Just looking for those things that just don't make sense, don't pattern match with what you expect. But that means you got to have a good sense of what it looks like normally, what normal behavior is in that situation, or you won't notice them.
No. And I think that's great. Like, I never even thought about that way around what's different. Because I think we always look at, you know, what's similar in a sense. Oh, it's just a fire, or it's just an instant we go to. It's always this way, rather than what's different on this situation that would then force maybe us to adapt due to the context. And this is why, you know, we must have that learning. And I say this, I gets really frustrated nowadays, because like, I hate using the words like, oh, learning culture or learning this or getting things, because because people say, oh, we've got a learning culture, and like, no, you haven't. When's the last time you sat people down and done like a after action review, or you war gamed anything, or done a red teaming, or done anything, or post mortem, pre mortem, or anything that actually was about learning, or, you know, developing different scenarios or anything like that? It'd probably be zero.
Well, so again, telling on myself, the you know, there's that PowerPoint capabilities versus the real world capabilities, you know, and when it came to building that the culture and everything to be able to enable mission command, and I was thinking about the communications part of it and the small group communication, basically crew resource management and that communications. And so there's this program that's called Interlabs that I've been work on to be able to be a deliverer of, but it was made for Lufthansa. But if you looked at it on the surface, you think, why do firefighters even care about this? And a bunch of German firefighters go away to like camps to practice this stuff where they just focus on it. But 4 computer screens, you crash in a spaceship spaceship has issues that you have to correct. And the computer screens are just there to create inputs, but you have to communicate verbally or over radios to each other. And there's a lot of coordination that's involved to be able to solve the problems. And oh my gosh, it is so funny how quickly somebody that's like, oh no, I'm good, I'm a great communicator. And then you do that and you realize that they weren't closing loops, or they weren't listening to other inputs, or they were saturating the radio with too much traffic. And the cool thing is they see it too, because it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And so you have those AARs right afterwards, and you talk about that and review it, and then they're able to improve off of that. But you're right, it's just giving them a training on what being part of mission command or what being part of an effective team means, and say, we're a learning culture because we provided a training. And they sat there and clicked all the boxes on their computer and got credit.
Yeah. Bloody, no. Yeah. On that online learning crap. But you're right. But I really don't think that a lot of civilian organisations, I'll put this, really appreciate actually training. Because what a lot of them, none of them do it. They have that online learning, or they'll go away, they'll have time away where they'll go off and do like a Go Ape or do something really stupid, but they're not actually doing these training, putting people in these situations that want to test their resilience, test the skills that are relevant to their jobs. They're just sort of like fun days out.
And so, I mean, if you can't suffer a consequence in a simulated environment in front of your peers and be accountable for that, and then yet you expected this person to train them to operate well as a team with real world consequences, it just doesn't work that way. At least not in my world. It's like, because it goes back to the very beginning of this thing about trust and you know, psychological safety. And if you haven't practiced that, you're not going to hear the term and then just be good at it. You know, people aren't going to see that you're, hey, I'm trustworthy. It's like saying that you're loving, right? My wife can tell you if I'm loving or not, but for me to go, I'm loving, you know, I may as well just say I'm purple.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of organizational leaders live in this. I call it like psychosis. There's like there's a difference. There's this perceived world that they tell everyone, and there's the actual world where things actually happen. And they've got to be there, like as a leader, as an organization. If there's a massive gap between that world you talk about and tell people about and what you actually do, then you're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, well, right. Work is done versus work is imagined.
Yeah.
And I've been a part of a lot of learning reviews, and you reference the policy, and there's a place for it, right? There's a compliance driven part of our job for sprinkler assessments, for making sure that your mask fits right and that the air that you're breathing has been tested properly. I get it. There's that part, and it's pretty X's and O's. You either did it when you're supposed to or you didn't do what you're supposed to. But then there's a lot of it that the work has been adapted because the way it was described to do it was ineffective, or just was a bad idea. And then all of a sudden when something goes wrong, then they look at it and go, oh, the reason it went wrong is because they weren't doing it like it says in the manual. Well, shit, we haven't been doing it the way it says in the manual for the last 10 years. That's not the problem. And then then you feel good, right? Hey, we did our assessment. We found this was the cause. He didn't follow the manual. And then you move on and you haven't fixed a thing. But you made one person where they damn sure won't tell you next time. When something goes wrong, they'll hide it.
Yeah.
And you'll lose that currency of honest communication. Yeah. I mean, that's
the thing. And it's like, it's almost as if we wait. It's like everyone knows about it. Everyone knows it. Everyone talks about it indirectly, but no one acknowledges it until something really goes wrong. And it's only when something really goes wrong they acknowledge it. And you're thinking, well, you could have done something before this. You just waited because it's easier to ignore it and hope that things don't align in the future for it to go wrong.
And a version of that, I agree with you. And a version of that is when there's a subordinate that's not doing something the way they should. And you say, well, and I've heard this a couple of different ways when we're doing these learner reviews. One of them is, hey, well, I was relatively new to the team and I didn't know if that was their culture. So I was just kind of trying to feel it out. You just told me you knew what they're doing was wrong. And if you're the leader, what their culture was before doesn't necessarily mean it's right. I get you have to, you need to maintain credibility. You don't want to put yourself on the outside. But that can't be your reason for not acting, especially when you see something that is deviating. And it's amazing how many different variations of that is just, because what I hear is that you're in a position of authority, you knew what happened and you chose not to take action.
Yeah. And that's why we have doctrine in those things to help us with that. But even in that situation, you at least go, that's interesting. Tell me how come you do it that way.
Oh yeah. You don't have to beat them up over it. You don't have to lose rapport over it. But if you ignore it, I mean, you think talk about from different people's perspective, right? So if you're that person, that subordinate, and then you just explain what you're doing and why, and the new boss who, you understand has some pretty good quals and came in here well recommended, doesn't say anything to you, it's easy for you to think that he likes what you're doing, or he or she.
Yeah, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, right. And he may go tell his buddies, hey, the book says this, but I told my boss about this way and he liked it.
Yeah.
And so it's
almost like I'm only saying this because I had my mum around at the house today when she had her dog, and she's got two of her dogs, and we got dogs. But one of her dogs is a absolute horror bag because it's like a cast off from a litter. So she took it.
Yeah, we call them rescues, but
yeah. And but she has no discipline with it. But she wants to. But she reinforces their behaviour all the time, because what it would do is it would go grab something that you shouldn't have, and she'll give it a treat to try and take the thing off the dog. But she's giving it a treat, and she can't realise that the reason why he's not improving is because you're reinforcing the bad behaviour. And I think that's the same in that situation. It's that sometimes we don't call it out, and just by the virtue of not calling it out, we're reinforcing that behaviour. So they don't know that it's wrong, because sometimes when things, it's almost like when you talk to people and go like, why did you do it that way? Don't know, we've always just done it that way. It's the things that have just gone on until someone actually challenges it and said, no, this is what we do, and let's do it properly. things will just carry on because they don't know, and no one's given that feedback.
So that's great. I love that. And I'll tell you that this, I don't know if this will land with the audience, but it's something that is near and dear to my heart. So I am passionate about archery elk hunting. If I could pick one thing to do with my free time, I would do it all the time. It is very hard. I like to eat elk, and I like to make sure that they have a good habitat and everything else up until that time. So it's funny. I work on both ends of it with helping restore habitat, and at the same time, I love to go elk hunting. But the best part, one of the things I enjoy, I don't know if I enjoy the most about it, but that I reflect on often, is that there's no excuses. So you have to get pretty close, and the elk, they obviously don't want you around. And so whenever things go wrong, it's your fault. The wind wasn't right, and you and the elk, but you never blame the elk. You never say, "Oh, you smelled me and you ran away." You shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But in the real world, I think about how times somebody's like, "Well, we talk about what we intended to do." That'd be me. Like I intended to sneak up on the elk, and then we talk about what they did. All I was trying to do was sneak up on him, and he was too small for me to shoot anyways, and so he should have known he was safe, but he ran off. We talk about that all the time, about like what we intend and then what the other person did to try to justify. Like you intend to train the dog. Well, you're not really training the dog because the dog's getting a reward every time it jumps up here, and it doesn't know that it's getting a reward for what you want it to do. It's getting rewarded for what it has already done.
Yeah,
And, I don't know if that makes sense, folks, but that sticks in my head all the time because
it definitely does, and I think that's too easy, isn't it, for us to go, that's what I intended to do, but it wasn't my fault. It was someone else's fault, or is this policy's fault? Rather than, actually the first part of learning is thinking, there was stuff that's probably out of your control, and we can reconcile that. But you've got to own up for what you did wrong. You shouldn't have took that. You didn't took that path where it's going to be there's a bracken and you made noise. It could be multiple things. You got to own that. And I hope one day I can come out back to America and do some elk hunting.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing to me.
It's a lot of fun, but you think about one of the that I'll tell myself, because you always do your own little AAR on yourself. One of them is taking a knee, so it's easier to make yourself a little bit smaller profile if you take a knee. But like, why in the military do you only take one knee when you stop on a patrol? Because it's uncomfortable. You're not going to fall asleep with one knee on the hard ground. And the same thing there. You take a knee, and then the elk, sometimes they move faster. You think they were. Sometimes they move a heck of a lot slower. And then you're on a knee for 30 minutes on rocks, and you're wanting to move a little bit, but now they're really close. And you tell yourself, never take a knee. But the next time, the intuition is to get down, get low, make yourself a little bit smaller visibility. So, and I do it again, and I kick myself.
We all know that as well. And definitely, if you've been there for a while, that first part when you have to stand when you've been on a knee for a while, definitely when you've been in the army for a long time, that hurts. You're like, oh, not taking a knee again. I'm going to stand.
Stand next time, and then you forget the next day. Yeah.
I've absolutely loved this conversation. Before we end it, though, what would you like for our listeners to go away and think about from this episode?
Oh, man, that's a great question. So I think just maybe one test. If you think about Mission Command, or if you think that you already are practice at Mission Command, is so I was thinking to myself as I said, how am I doing a good job? I'd say if intent is clearly enough communicated, that they can exercise discipline initiative without communication. And so if you look at your system, your Mission Command system, you want to build, or that you maybe already have, and you say, if I communicate intent on the mission clear enough, that if intent's one part, right? But then the situation caused them to have to deviate, that they can deviate with the graded comms, and that deviation will that you'll back them on that deviation, and that they'll have a good rationale for it. I think if you get to that point, man, you're doing really good. So I think that's a good kind of.
I think that's really good. Definitely, they can think about actually how for every deviation, if they're calling you up for every deviation, you haven't got that, so something's missing.
Yeah. If you have to make every decision, then you are doing it wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
And you're just like whoever you are, you're the strategy guy, right? Higher up you're supposed to have more. Your horizon should be further. You should be less looking down at the task, looking forward at where you're going. And And every time you're having to deal with something that a subordinate leader or person should have been dealing with, you're taking time out of your ability to look forward and look out.
Yeah.
You just are.
Yeah,
Something's gonna give.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and I think that's the powerful thing, isn't it? It's like there is so many benefits to that. For the reason why I want this, but also, you know, if you're constantly dealing with this stuff, you're not doing your job. And if you're not doing your job, eventually that feedback loop's going to come back around, and it's going to start destabilizing the organization because you're not looking
Yeah.
out and ahead. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
It will do you no good at that time to blame that you have subordinates that don't know what they're doing, because that's your fault, man.
Yeah, and it's too late. That's awesome. And please send me the paper, so I'll link it to the show notes for people to have a look at. I think it'd be fascinating for people to read. And for the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode as much as I have, please like and subscribe and share to your network so they can get the value from this great conversation. And Jayson, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to finally have you on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mike. I've really enjoyed my time. You take care.
Cool. And you, buddy. Take care.